Business models reinvent every industry. Inside Analysis is your source of information and insight about how to make the most of this exciting new era. Learn more at InsideAnalysis.com.
InsideAnalysis.com.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Welcome back once again to the only coast-to-coast radio show that's all about the information economy. It's time for Inside Analysis. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here on the road today at Click World in Las Vegas. Very excited to be here with lots of my colleagues and friends. Click is doing amazing things. They've bought some companies lately. They bought Talend, for crying out loud. That's a pretty huge deal. I'm old enough to remember when Click bought Expressor Software. I think that was like in 2010 or 11. Something like that, a long time ago. Well, Click is a powerhouse, so very happy to be in Vegas to cover Click World. More on that later, perhaps. But today, we're going to really dive into AI and AI-fueled analytics and talk about various issues like how to deal with AI, like how to deal with the guardrails side of AI. So ChatGPT has been out for a while now, version 3.0. ChatGPT 4, I believe, is already out, or they're at least working on it. But it's amazing. But if you've worked with it, it doesn't always get things right. The first time I saw results about myself on a webinar, it gave a very accurate depiction. I was really impressed and kind of freaked out. And then I went and did it myself. I searched for myself, and it said that I'd written 3 books. And I was like, really? Are you seeing into the future? Because I haven't written any books yet. But it conflated me probably with people from Bloor Research out of the UK. So this giant engine is doing things, and it's grabbing pieces of information and assembling them in ways that make sense. And remember, a large language model's job is to predict what text you want to see based upon your prompt. Now, it's reaching into a vast trove of information. It's very sophisticated. If you look up how these LLMs work, it's really quite remarkable what they're doing and how they got here. But remember, it's not always accurate. So if you're in the enterprise and you're working with analytics, for example, you're trying to make decisions about your company, well, guess what? You want accuracy. You're going to make sure that there's going to be accuracy, that there are checks and balances, and that you can have an audit trail and so on and so forth. Of course, in AI, we talk about explainability, right? You have to be able to explain how you did things. Well, ask ChatGPT how it does things. Sometimes it'll tell you, and sometimes it won't. I asked ChatGPT which database it used, and it demurred. It said it wasn't going to tell me. Well, I can tell you that a regulator is going to say, well, that's not okay. I'm not too happy with that answer. So we're really at a very interesting time right now. These engines, these LLMs, there's not just one. Of course, there's DALL-E too, Databricks, and those folks have cranked out an amazing new technology, DALL-E, which is not maybe as far along in some senses as ChatGPT, but is apparently pretty good at following instructions. And again, this is just the beginning, folks. We're just at the beginning of this phase. And then we'll talk about AI-fueled analytics and some amazing stories I've heard from Arijit. And with that, I'll bring you in, Arijit Sengupta from Able. You folks are doing some crazy stuff. You've got that 1000x price performance benchmark with Google, but now you're also really focusing on Chattable. And I was listening, as you were saying earlier in our pre-show, in our 5-minute drill, how you're using ChatGPT to reach into the metadata and give some text and some context to the user so they can see, okay, which terms are important, which fields in various databases, I'm guessing, are important. What should you be looking at? And it's the kind of thing where you're basically saying to the user, look, here are these 72 needles we found in your haystack. Why don't you review them and let us know what you think? Is that about right, Arijit?
Yeah, and we are actually using an explainable AI to do that first part, because generative AI would do a bad job of figuring out what you should see. Generative AI does a fantastic job of explaining it back to you, though it can do hallucinations. We'll come to that in a second, right? So what we said is, can I have an explainable AI ask millions of questions of my data, figure out what are the key insights? But earlier, we used to create PowerPoint slides and charts out of it, and people still couldn't interpret charts really well, right? So they would ask us to help them interpret the dashboard. So we are now using generative AI to interpret that dashboard and give them summary information. but we are not passing the generative AI the raw data, only statistics. I believe
Let's dive into that a little bit here. So why don't you kind of walk us through what the engine is doing, and then what you see as a user. As a user, what I saw is you get a bunch of different dashboards that kind of lay out certain metrics and things that look interesting, right? Can you kind of talk about how that happens?
Right. If I may step back for a second, the entire space of analytics is defined by a business user had a business question, like how can I sell to young people? And that question can't be answered from the data directly. So an analyst would take that question and turn it into many, many questions, like what channels work well with young people? What products do young people like? What time of day should I contact young people? These are factual statements. You can query a database to get the answer to that question, right? So the entirety of analytics has actually been, how can I take a business question, turn it into a bunch of analytics questions, get my data set up in a way that those analytics questions can be answered.
Wow.
Then you summarize it back to a nice little presentation back to the business user. Now, what we have figured out is those two pieces can both be automated now. You can use an explainable AI to ask millions of questions, use statistics like Sharpe values, which are very well understood, to figure out what variable and combination of variables really explains that outcome that the business user cared about. And then use generative AI to summarize all those insights back to something that the business user could consume. So you're automating the entirety of analytics.
Yeah, well, what you're doing is you're bringing these different engines together in a way that optimizes the value at certain points in the workflow, right? I mean, you even see this at a very basic level with computation, trying to do the data gathering, data processing, and then the inference, right? Which are separate components of the process, right, Arijit?
Exactly. And every part of this needs to be efficient, right? So like if you were asking a million questions and it would costing you a lot of money, people would say, stop asking a million questions for me. So we figured out something really funny. All these underlying systems, like if you look at Snowflake, if you look at BigQuery, etc., they charge us by how long the compute is up to answer your questions. So if I can cram in a million questions in the time a human could ask 5 questions, you're still getting charged the same amount. I just asked a million questions for the cost of 5.
Wow. I mean, that's very interesting. And so what you've done is you've rethought the information architecture of a query, really, and of the whole process of analytics, which again, you think about what you're trying to do. You're trying to improve the business. You're trying to understand something. First of all, you're trying to look for something. So just that, this is what I really like about your approach here, Arijit, is I'm a huge fan of discovery. To me, discovery is like almost 80% of the ball game, because that's when you're looking at things and you're trying to find something that matters, some signal somewhere. And it's all over the place. If you're just looking at histograms, who knows what that means? But if you have context and then can start looking at trends going up, down, sudden things, anomalies, stuff that's out left and right, that gets interesting. But to your point, it's very expensive if you're asking one question, then one question, then one question. Why not ask a million questions, get 1,000 sort of pots of gold to look in, and then take it from that perspective? And that's what you're doing, right?
Yeah. And now the benefit of asking a million questions is there might be a spurious correlation. Something looks really good, but something else was causing it. Because you have asked every question, you can actually double check. When a user goes to a chart that looks really interesting, you can tell the user, look, this is not because of anything that you're looking at in this chart. It's actually caused by this completely other thing that you didn't even look at.
Yeah. So we have one of my friends is on the call here in this virtual studio audience. Neil Radin is asking, lots of analytical queries versus a chat cost benefit, I think, but who pays the piper? Well, I mean, you do have to pay something. I mean, you have to pay, of course, to get the software. You've got some kind of ridiculous introductory price, I think. But then, obviously you pay on, Snowflake or Databricks or wherever. But the point is you pulled out the useful bits, and then the user is then kind of cranking it in their own little environment. So you're not paying the whole time to be leveraging this engine of Snowflake or Databricks. You're just paying a little bit of time to bring back the goods. And then in your own environment, you're paying very little to just all sorts of examination, right?
Yeah. And we do, in our system, it's all serverless and in-browser manipulation. So serverless compute is very inexpensive, spikes up for a very short time, and then immediately goes down. And in-browser manipulation is just on your browser. So the worst case situation is if you never restart your computer, you might have to restart it. But beyond that, it's just happening in your browser. It's not costing you additional money.
Yeah, and for our radio audience out there, let's dive into serverless. Because I'll tell a quick funny story. One of my best friends is a developer. He's worked at some very, very big companies, and he's given me a lot of insights. And one of his jokes years ago was, if you got a problem in your business and you buy a server to fix the problem, now you have two problems. You got the server, you got the original problem. And with serverless, you kind of abstract some of that stuff away. Can you explain why that is, like what you've done?
Absolutely. So the funny part is the serverless is actually the original promise of the cloud, because we were always told with the cloud is that it's like buying electricity instead of buying a generator. But that's not what happened. The first generation of the cloud was you were renting the generator, but you were paying for the generator whether or not you used it. Serverless, true serverless, people use the term in lots of different ways. They sometimes conflate pay-per-use with serverless. Serverless literally means you're only paying for the compute as you're executing it. If you're not executing something on it, you're not paying. You're not paying for reserving that instance, if you will, right? So when you move to serverless, we can spike up thousands of instances in parallel for a few seconds or minutes and shut them down, and we get charged very little. This is why we have done benchmark studies with United Health Group, Cisco, New York City Health and Hospitals, showing that millions of variable combinations for like $15 of cost, sometimes $3 of cost. The reason we did that is the cost differential of truly using serverless is so high that people can't believe it until you get customer benchmarks.
Now, let me try to put this in context, because a number of years ago, quite a few years ago now, in fact, SAP went down this highway of our buddy Hasso. In fact, I remember starting a chat or a Twitter hashtag, Hasso is my hero, because that guy's hilarious. But they went down this road of in-memory, right? And so with S/4HANA, which is their next generation ERP, it's all in memory. And there are lots of value propositions there, one of which is you can do all this real-time stuff. So instead of having, again, from an architectural perspective, instead of having to go from memory out to disk, grab some information, come back, oh, I need something else, go to this disk, come back. That all takes time. It breaks down workflows because things are slow or there are latencies or whatever. But in their vision, the in-memory world would afford so many advantages. And it sounds like serverless kind of does some of the same things. Can you differentiate those two approaches?
So firstly, these things are complementary, right? Like if you have a lot of stuff in memory, it's less expensive. Like that is just true. But think of every optimization done till date is with a human first mindset. So HANA really sped up queries, but they were speeding up queries that a human asked. So you're focusing on latency. The key insight in an AI first world is, why the heck are you starting with a human first mindset? If I can cram 1 million questions in the time a human can ask 5 questions, that shift is so fundamental that all the incremental savings that we were thinking of, how do I make the query a little more efficient, query a little faster, it becomes irrelevant because the human cannot compare to an AI in speed of asking questions. It's game over.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we have a question about SHAP. Do you know what SHAP is? And someone is saying, is there a better way?
So there are many ways, and there are a lot of religions about it, by the way. So SHAP is one that we used when I first started my first company, Beyond Core, which became Salesforce Einstein Discovery. We used something called a piecewise linear regression model, which was actually state of the art at the time. Then we have a colleague who is a crazy Bayesian proponent, and he was at Google for the longest time. And that guy pushed for inclusion probabilities in Bayesian models. The reality is these are all different techniques that you can try. The key is, can you do it completely automatically? And can you do it at massively low cost? If you can do those two things, the market has to shift to the new way of doing things. This is the shift from Yahoo to Google, because Yahoo was categorizing the web manually, looking at web pages and putting them up on the Yahoo index manually. And Google said, hey, page rank, I'm going to look at the entire internet and do this completely automatically, 1,000 the cost per page. And the market shifted. That's what always happens.
Wow. And I feel like, we're kind of teetering on that kind of inflection point again, because I remember I'm old enough to remember the Yahoo days. I'm old enough to remember when Google started and when it really took off, when it hit its own inflection point. And let's face it, I mean, they became a behemoth. You Google things. But one of the first shows we did about ChatGPT, one of the guests said, yeah, instead of Googling something, now I go to ChatGPT. And that was the line. I heard that. I was like, wow, because one of the cool things ChatGPT did that I'm pretty sure Google's going to try to mimic now is they structured their UI more like a workspace instead of just a freaking single field to fill in. And I've wondered for a long time. I mean, Google did come along with this whole option of showing you things that you might be looking for example, recommending searches that other people are doing. And you can find out where their sensors are working by noticing when that goes away, for example, just as a side note. But now we're really at another huge inflection point. And it seems to me like you're positioned right at that nexus. What do you think?
Absolutely. And understand why this inflection point is happening. Part of the problem is people are not thinking deeply about what human limitation has ChatGPT really eliminated. The key thing it has eliminated is the power of synthesis. Mm-hmm. Combining information together. Right now, the focus is on the generative side of things, right? I create a beautiful painting. I create a beautiful poem. Extremely creative capabilities, right? Exciting, I would claim fundamentally not transformative for the human potential to achieve things. We could have written a poem. I would have probably avoided writing the poem in some cases. Now I can write a poem. Great. I can do a beautiful picture. But I could have never synthesized my sales information, my marketing information, my logistics information, my supply chain information into key insights before. Mm-hmm. It just was not possible. And generative AI's ability to synthesize is the part people are completely missing. Because ChatGPT started from the generative side of things.
Right.
In the enterprise, the value is not going to come from the generative side of things. It's going to come from the translation, from the synthesis. We have so much information in our companies today. It is that we can't act on it.
Yeah, right.
And we have never had a tool to do that. We have had tools to ask questions. We have not had good tools to synthesize many answers together.
See, this is so exciting because from my perspective, it's literally all coming together, and synthesis is what matters most, right? You do analysis, you deconstruct, for example, but at the end of the day, when you're going to make a decision, you're going to make a big call on something, you need to synthesize all the information you've got to get it right. Folks, don't touch that. I'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Take us to the future.
All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis. Take us to the future, indeed. I feel like we're on the high-speed take us to the future train these days with ChatGPT and Dolly, I mentioned, from Databricks. And of course, Click is doing some very interesting things as well. Our good buddy Yves Mulkers is with us from 7W Data, flew all the way over from Belgium to be part of the Click World show these days. And you know what, Yves, when I think about what Origin has been talking about here, about using this architecture of ChatGPT and your own information environment in a process where first you kind of scan and do this discovery and see what are all the different things you could be looking at, and then leverage the power of these LLMs to synthesize that. I mean, goodness gracious, I think about taking ChatGPT and pointing it at these 4,000-page bills that our Congress has been passing the last few years and saying, give me the 5-page summary of what the heck this all means. That is incredibly powerful for the business, for government, for anyone to, number one, just know what kind of a beast are we riding these days. And that's what you can now figure out. Am I overstating this?
To my belief, not. It's amazing. I've been playing around with the large language models as well. And where you say that the advantage is that you can instruct them to explain it to a professor, to a 5-year-old, the same type of information. And that's so powerful. Where Arjit was explaining as well, this is the synthesis what you're doing upon all this data. And I was thinking back as the days, 10 years, 13 years back, when big data became a big hype. And I was trying to understand, coming from the traditional data modeling and data warehousing, dimensional modeling background, and what is new in data science. So I've recently read an article, and they say what typically data scientists do, they start from the end. So they start from the data and try to gain the insights, where you in fact need to start with the question and then try to answer the question, go and find the data and get these answers. And I think with the large language models, we're coming pretty close to be able to do that, but at a speed, an amazing speed, where you say, okay, you were talking about creating an image with the models and so on, and you just throw something out. You look at it and you say, this is not what I wanted. Just tweak it a bit. But it's at an amazing speed. Otherwise, you have to go back to the drawing board and you get an answer in 1 day, 2 days. And I think that definitely will trigger a lot of possibilities on really getting information out of the data and everything that we're capturing. I think you put it right with the transition between Yahoo and Google and what they were doing. And this will be exactly the next step, what we're trying to achieve or will achieve with the large language models.
Well, and and you think about, and I always do this how we got here story. Think about the how we got here story in data warehousing, for example. Well, 40 odd years ago, some smart people figured out we can't query these enterprise resource planning systems, these ERP systems. We can't query them. And so we can't really understand. Yeah, they're doing what they're supposed to, but we can't look at this in a strategic way. And so we decided, hey, guess what? We'll ETL, extract, transform, load key data sets out of the enterprise systems in batches, and we'll use that to load it into a relational data warehouse, such that in the warehouse, you can do some analysis and understand, get good ideas, go back and then tell the business, hey, maybe we should do it this way. That was a very slow and time-consuming process. And I think one crucial aspect here is we stripped out all the context so we could stream that small amount of information through the thin pipes to get crunched by the slow processors and give us some view of the world. Well, what was one of the jokes I heard? A lot of the generative AI stuff that's being done now is being done to replace the context that we stripped out when we loaded the data warehouse. Well, it's like, how much sense does that make? Not a whole lot of sense. So now, again, this gets back to an architecture and a different way of doing things entirely. I'm not going to say we're not going to need the warehouses. They're doing great. They're doing interesting things. That's a great source for you. But we can finally synthesize all that incredibly rich 80% of the data context with that 20% engineered, refined, certified, data qualified view of the world. That's what we wanted the whole time, right, Yves?
Yeah, exactly. I think you put it right. It's the 20% effort what you're getting to get to 80% of the insights. I've learned as well to build your data warehouse. Everything had to be pixel perfect. We had the special dimensions in place as well, where you say, okay, we don't know this value and so on. And now if you talk to ChatGPT, it explains you, hey, I don't know this and I'm missing this part. So that's incredibly powerful that you get to that insight. And I've learned it on a project as well, where we were able to get the insights of a breakdown of the cost of goods for a manufacturer. And I thought, but this is not correct. But they were so happy to see the insights, where before they didn't have any insights at all. They were really driving blind on all the data, on all the processes, what they had. And if you can spike that already, then you directly know in which direction you can look for insights, the extra data, what you need to get a more enriched view. And I'm very, very excited to see what we can do with these models on top of our piles of data.
Well, and let me comment on the data cleansing point, because exactly right. Until the data was pixel perfect, you couldn't run analysis. One of the interesting things is AI finds certain kinds of patterns very easy to deal with, which BI couldn't. In BI, I had to get my data laid out exactly right, but AI can say, of all the different metrics you had, only these 7 matter. And now I have to do pixel perfect, if you will, for that 7 things. But before, what we were doing was we were trying to clean up everything before we could do something. So we had this funny experience with Chartable where somebody loaded up a data set which had all the basketball positions in the data, like the variable names were the various basketball positions, and they were like 2-character names. And I don't know anything about basketball. I couldn't understand it. But when the generative part looked at it, it expanded out all those variables to human understandable things. And our customer said, like, how did you do that? Because I deliberately gave you completely garbage variable names. But that's the point, because the things that didn't make sense in the world of human first are completely easy in the world of AI first. And the things that are easy in the human first, that is hard in AI first. But you just recognize the world has changed. So you can't just take the lessons of the past and apply it to the future.
That's very interesting. Go ahead, Eve.
Yeah, I was thinking as well. You talk about this thing where you say we expand the codes. It's really about the semantics, and what you see now with the large language models, they're even capable of giving the insights language agnostic. So you can ask your question in Dutch and get the answer in English, and that's really powerful. And I'm always thinking about Star Trek, where everybody speaks English, and this is kind of, hey, this is becoming a reality. And this is so amazing, where you either that an article has been written in German, in French, in English, in whatever kind of language, and you can put all that knowledge together. This is really a first timer that we're able to do that.
So we had a funny case. We have Chartable has been out for just 1 week, right? So one of our Fortune 100 clients, one of their users wrote a sentence with a combination of Finnish, Spanish, and English in the same sentence. And the system came back with a correct answer. And they actually send it back to us saying, look, we just want you to know this worked. My first reaction was, what's wrong with you? Why were you testing with a combination of Finnish, Spanish, and English? But yes, to generative AI, it doesn't matter. It just translated it back to the concept. And then Abel's information model works at the concept level. It's not working at the human language level anyway. It's working at the level of math. And thus comes the answer. But it seems magic. It's just that it's a human limitation that we are testing. We're actually not testing an AI's limitation when I do that. For a human, that's an impossible task. For an AI, it's just, different tokens came in. I sorted the tokens out. I figured out what it meant, and I was done.
Yeah, and I'm thinking to myself, the whole industry of analytics, right? Everything that we've done in this business, all of it around trying to understand what is happening relative to your business plans, like when you do projections and forecasting and so forth. I mean, that's part of the analytical world, but the discovery part is huge. It's just knowing, number one, what do we have? What information do we have? How many systems do we have? And when you connect an engine like this to your information architecture, now we should talk a little bit about, single tenant versus multi-tenant and, what can be gleaned away, because again, LLMs were trained on the interwebs. They went out and just sucked up all the stuff that you can get in the internet. And that's what they use to train these engines, right? So there is something to be said for that whole equation. I'm sure it'll be sorted out over time. But the point is, think about this. As you're driving down the road right now, you have, of course, you're looking through the front window. You can look through your side windows. You can look in your rear view. Now we have cameras where you can, go in reverse and see behind you in the screen. So that's getting pretty good. But what if while you're driving down the road, the engine is saying, hey, I noticed that you really like this particular restaurant. It's actually 2 blocks over that way. Or there's a sale. I noticed you were searching for a dress for your wife. There's a sale on a dress that she likes 2 blocks this way. The point is, these engines can see so many little details, and frankly, people are fairly predictable. If you get right down to brass tacks, we're pretty easy to understand in certain ways in terms of our movements, our motions, our intentions. And so to have an engine that would look all around, like Kit, remember with the famous TV show with Kit?
Knight Rider, yeah.
Michael, drive 2 miles to the left. That's what we're talking about here. What do you think?
Yeah, it's exactly that. That I think it's the multiple contexts at the same time what you can look at, and I always refer back to the traditional stuff of dimensional modeling, where you knew, okay, we need 7 to 12 type of contexts or concepts. Context is still something else. The concepts, and then depending on the context, which is financial or economical or whatever. you get these insights, and now it's all interrelated thanks to how large language models work, and a graph, which is how our brain is wired as well, how we think and make associations. And this is coming closer by how a human looks at information and tries to find the patterns and insights as well, and in a better way even. I mean, yeah, there are discussions that all output from the large language models are not ethical or not correct, definitely, but I think we will make less mistakes with the models than typically we do as a human.
Yeah, and here's a very interesting technical question. I'll throw it over to Origit. One attending in our virtual studio audience is asking, are there efficient algorithms to retrain an LLM on a data streaming basis as the transactions are recorded in an ERP? I mean, I'm sure there are some out there, but what are your thoughts on that, Origin?
There are quite a few ways of doing that, but I'm going to say something that'll get me into trouble. These are not technological problems to solve. The thing you need to solve is the business problem. Why are you training your LLM on the data on a streaming basis? If it is to do mathematics on that data, that's going to be a very different question than if I'm going to do search on the data. What's my use case? Why am I doing this? And fundamentally think of things that are low fixed cost approaches. So if something takes you a fixed cost, this technology space is evolving so fast that anything I do to fine tune a model, there'll be a better model 2 weeks from now.
Wow.
So I am obsessively focused on low fixed cost. I don't care about marginal cost as long as the value is greater than the marginal cost, right? Do not fixate on technologies right now because the technologies are going to evolve so fast. I'm kind of an expert in this space. I'm not going to say I'm a top expert. I'm kind of an expert. I can tell you much of what I'm seeing from supposed experts on YouTube and sessions is complete garbage. So even the experts talking about it mostly don't know what's happening. But that's the cool part of this kind of a space. There's so many things going on that no individual expert will ever know. So set yourself up for flexibility to react quickly to change. The Dolly example that Eric brought up a couple of times, 3 weeks back, I would have said Dolly can't possibly be interesting, right? If you look at the number of parameters compared to what it was, the key thing about Dolly was, okay, it's a human curated question answering. Great, that is interesting. It's interesting from a licensing perspective. It's great that I can have something that is truly open source, but I didn't think it would be good. Now I've got my team using it, trying it out as one of the alternative models because it is looking interesting, right? No expert would have predicted that 3 weeks back.
Yeah. Well, the beautiful thing here is that we have all these engines that we can leverage and cobble together. Open source as a mindset, as a philosophy, gets a lot of credit for all of that. Because in the old days, there wasn't so much intention on sharing the code. Why would you do that? That was your proprietary content. That was your IP, your intellectual property. That has all changed. Now you really want to show your cards and you want to put it out there for the world. Many hands make light the work, many eyes make few the errors. So that open source stuff really has, I'll say, penetrated the industry and is now the standard operating procedure. So that's all really good stuff. And because we also have the cloud, we have these marshaling areas now with tremendous compute that can be spun up and spun down very quickly. Things are changing very rapidly. You're right, Origin, and be agile. That's the key. Set yourself up to be agile, to be able to change quickly. Well, folks, don't touch that. We'll be right back. You are listening to Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again. What a fantastic show. Today we're talking to Arijit Sengupta of Able. They have a new technology out, Chat Able. It's AIBLE for those on the radio. And Eve Mulkers is with us from 7W Data. Eve and I are both at the Click World Conference. Very excited to be here in Las Vegas. at the Mandalay Bay. It's a beautiful place. Even brought the wife, and she's loving it. So we're going to have some fun as soon as this show is over. I can promise. But I'll throw it back to Eve. You've been talking about how data quality is always an important issue. I mean, the excitement that you hear in my voice is because I look at the mosaic of technologies and processes that we've had in place for a long, long time now. And we all know that old habits die hard until reality crashes you to the ground and you better change what you're doing. And that's what's happening right now. And I love this information strategy group concept because guess what? You can change so many things now. I get all excited about process mining too, and being able to kind of mix and match these things to kind of see. But when you connect an engine like that to your information architecture, obviously do it carefully, but you can learn so much and you can rewire the whole enterprise. And guess what? Now is the time to do that. But Eve, why don't you tell us a bit about the quality stuff you were mentioning, and then Origin, I think you want to jump on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. We talk about AI, artificial intelligence, information architecture. What is typical? There has been some remarks on the outputs of ChatGPT and OpenAI models as such, but it was based upon the quality that the data quality that has been, the quality of the data that has been fed to the models, and therefore didn't have any good results out of that. But where you see with large language models, we can highlight already which is missing in the data. Is there an issue with the data? And you can highlight that. So you get a warning already up front where you say the output of the model won't be what we are expecting from that. So definitely the models will help us in fixing itself. And that's very, very exciting to see. Hey, we can put that in place and we get the triggers and we know up front that we will get the wrong answers, but we can play with it. And you can see what is the value we can get out of that. And with the speed that we can do that, that's gonna give so many more insights. And like you say, you don't have to model it up front as such. You have a typical model, you can see what is coming out of that. And then tweak it, and it's gonna be. We already call it prompt engineers, and these are the people that will start playing with the models and tweak it to get not the insights that you want to get, but drive and guide the insights with all that type of prompt engineering.
Yeah, and I'll throw it over to Origin to comment on, and we've got some fun chat going on in the chat room here. Someone is writing, no way to easily rewire a serious enterprise. It's all interwoven steel chains. I'm sure that is, but let me tell you, when you watch your revenue crash by like 30%, for example, that's when those chains break. And when stuff breaks, I remember learning that in Mandarin, the character, or the Chinese language character for chaos, is very, very similar to the Chinese character for opportunity. There's just a slight little change. And the point is, in chaotic times, there is tremendous opportunity, right? So Origin, I'll throw that over to you. These are very disruptive times right now. You look at how ChatGPT, from a marketing and creative perspective, and these other like Mid-Journey, my friend showed us Mid-Journey the other day, which is absolutely shocking in its power. I mean, the artistic work you can create in no time for pennies on the dollar is just mind-blowing. Well, that doesn't mean artists are going to go away, but it does mean that there's a new canvas, there's a new way of producing art. And so guess what? The people who really jump on that bandwagon are going to do pretty well. The people who ignore it, sooner or later, it's going to be hard to get by. But Origin, what do you think?
Yeah, your original question to me was about the data quality part. So I'm going to go there and come back to this. On the data quality side of things, what happens is an AI can make it interesting for a business stakeholder to be involved in the data quality exercise. The problem today is the person who knows most about the data quality problem is often the business stakeholder. And they have zero interest and zero tooling to engage in the data quality exercise. But this is last month, we were at Gartner Data Analytics Summit, and we had Cisco and New York City Health and Hospitals present, and United Health Group present on stage. And what NYC H&H and Cisco talked about is how the able analysis will often show them just data quality problems. But it shows them in the form of charts and graphs and interactions that are interesting to the business stakeholder. So the business stakeholders get sucked into the conversation, and they'll start saying, well, That's not the definition of this variable. Like, Yves, that was literally your point. It's like the definition of the variable is wrong, but only the business stakeholder knows that it's wrong.
Yeah.
But by getting sucked into something valuable, see, when people say I'm doing a data quality exercise, I always ask them, well, what's your definition of good enough data quality? They don't have one. So if you don't have a definition of what is good enough data quality, you're doing an infinite loop process that creates no value. But if you can get something good enough, if you can get value from your data, however garbage it is, and then iterate very quickly while bringing in the stakeholders, you're actually, the initial analysis is part of the solution. And this goes back to my point about why the cost of that automated analysis has to be ridiculously low. If the cost is high, then you're always going to say, let me clean up the data a little bit before I throw a team of data scientists at it. But if the cost is like $5, you're saying like, look, having a conversation with my data engineer about my data quality problem cost me more than $5. Let me just try the automated process and see what happens. So it's not just complete automation. It has to be complete automation at 1,000 times lower cost. That's when the first reaction is, let me just throw the AI at that problem. And that's the point we are at right now, by the way. What people don't realize is we are at an AI first moment in time. And if you're thinking you're still at a human first moment in time, you've completely missed the most important insight of the last few months. When we introduced Chartable, I set the team the goal that by May 1st, when we are going GA, we should get 100 signups. In the first week, we had 100 activations. Forget about signups. So 100 different companies using Chartable in the first week, it has been available. It is fundamental, the people's interest in these technologies and the people's ability to extract value from these technologies has fundamentally shifted. It's not a 6-month implementation. People were getting value 5 minutes after logging, like we see them, right? We can see when they created the account, when they logged in, when they put up their first data set, when they did their first thumbs up. People were getting to their first thumbs up in 5 minutes.
Wow.
That's the fascinating part.
Yeah, when I was talking to Steve Lucas from Boomi a couple of weeks ago, he was telling me they connected it to their systems, and he asked it something like, show me all our different order to cash scenarios right now. And it went, and listed all these workflows. And he was like, he said he still hasn't been able to get his eyebrow down from the experience, because that's how much it blew his mind, right? And this goes to show you how quickly you can get to value. The key is to be a master of the prompt, right? To know what to prompt it to do, kind of like the Google query. But the thing with ChatGPT, again, is it gives you this synthesized view of the world. And depending upon how good your prompt is, you can get a tremendous amount of value very quickly, right, Yves?
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking along the side, what was typically when you had good analysis, if you had a good business analyst and he throws out the 5 whys, knows the business as well. But this is now all available in the models. And at the speed, they don't dispute. You get 10 answers. You say, give me 10 titles, give me 20 titles, give me 50 titles. And they don't complain. If you do that with a business user and you come back for the so many time to understand the business and the context, they get annoyed. It's typically human because they're so loaded. And I think that's a very big differentiator as well for these models. And what you say, Ajit, if we can keep the cost very low for that, man, this is a no-brainer to do your analysis in such a way. And you throw it out and you say, we know it's not perfect, but it's already, like you say, after 5 minutes, you get these insights. That's really amazing. And you don't have to put up the architecture. You don't have to put up the infrastructure. You don't have to do the analysis. You throw everything in there, and the models, they know how to relate everything together. Well, there is something more behind the scenes going on, but it's amazing what we now can achieve with the models.
30 seconds left. Arjun, I'll throw it to you. 30 seconds.
Well, the key thing I would just tell people is just get started, try things. If you're sitting on the sidelines, you're missing the point. If you're like prompt augmentation you were talking about, these products will put in the prompt augmentation in there. Like in Chartable, we put in the right prompts because users don't know how to. We give them different options that they can use. But every part of this is going to get automated so that the user experience will get simpler and simpler. And the cost is going to get lower and lower. But get started now. Start trying a different way of doing things. That's the hard thing for a human. Doing something differently is hard for people.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But this is fun. It's going to blow your mind, folks. You got to check it out. So ChatGPT, check it out. Check out Chattable and look these folks up online, folks. You've been listening to the only coast to coast show about the information economy. It's called Inside Analysis. Talk to you next time.